Hi everybody, our presentation is called A Framework for Assessment in Multicultural Counseling. The article was written by Ingrid Greiger and Joseph Ponerato, and Vonda Woodall and myself, Jordan Najafi, created the presentation. So, the demographic in the United States is changing and has been changing for decades. It's becoming more diverse, and as a result, counselors are going to continue to come across more culturally diverse students. And one of our quotes was, "There is a perception among multicultural specialists, however, that the majority of counselors are not adequately trained to conduct accurate clinical assessments of clients who represent culturally diverse groups." There are two theoretical constructs of multicultural counseling: the worldview and acculturation. Our worldview is the lens through which we interpret our world, and it's very culturally based and stems from our socialization process. So it's very individualized in addition to being based on the culture in which we were raised. Acculturation is defined as a multidimensional and psychosocial phenomenon that is reflected in psychosocial changes that occur in individuals as a result of their interaction with a new culture. And disacculturation and ethnic identity development are very related to attitudes towards Western mental health because it encompasses how people from diverse cultures interact with the dominant culture, which in this case is Westernized, Eurocentric, and Anglo Saxon. So there are six components between the acculturation and worldview and how they work within a counseling session. And these are very useful in counseling assessments and treatments of multicultural learners and people. The first one is the client's level of psychological mindedness. The second is the family's level of psychological mindedness. The third is both the client and family's attitudes towards helping and counseling. The fourth is the client's level of acculturation. The fifth is the family's level of acculturation. And the sixth is the family's attitude towards the level of acculturation.
The article gave us several examples of these six levels, and the first one had to do with the client's level of psychological mindedness, and this is where the worldview impacts the level of psychological mindedness. And the example they gave us was of a 28-year-old married Asian woman. She was a student here in the United States. She actually had gone home to China where she suffered a miscarriage. While she was there, her family took very good care of her physically, but they never addressed the emotional health that was needed. She didn't understand the concept of depression. And when she came back to the United States as a student, she was very unmotivated. She had many signs of depression, didn't know what was wrong with her. So as a part of her treatment process, the counselor had to educate her on the psychological constructs, like what depression is, because that's something she was not familiar with from her culture. The next example is in regards to the family's level of psychological mindedness. And here, family members may or may not be receptive to psychological treatment. The example that they gave in the article was about an Irish American family. And something that's very important to a traditional Irish American family is stoicism, pulling yourself up on your own, not going to others for help, and not making a big deal about things. And this story was about a 19-year-old college student, a female sophomore. Her parents had had a very violent relationship as she was growing up. She also had siblings who suffered from mental health issues that were not addressed. Her mother passed away of cancer, and during the grief process, she tried to talk about her feelings and address some of the relationship issues that she saw with her father. This became violent and physical, and her father actually left her with two black eyes. At this point, she did seek counseling, and one of the things that her counselor had to do was to, in the treatment, include exploring her family's role in her own mental health. And she had to begin to understand the part that her father and other members of her family played in her mental health issues. The third example was in regards to client families' attitudes towards counseling and helping. Other American ethnic groups, like Italian American and Hispanic American families, consider speaking to a counselor a violation of privacy. They are often comfortable talking to someone who is close to the family, like a priest, but sometimes they consider going to a counselor like going to a stranger, and that would be in violation of honoring the family. The example they gave was a 25-year-old Dominican student. She actually worked for her father and recognized that her father was having an affair. The mother was very suspicious of the father having an affair and came to her daughter as a confidant and leaned on her heavily through this emotional time, and neither of them were comfortable confronting the father. The student did seek counseling despite these internal conflicts and violating the privacy of the family. One of the things that her counselor had to work on was understanding the gender roles within a traditional Latino family and understanding the privacy issues that her client was facing. Next is the client's level of acculturation. Roots of psychotherapy are white, European, and Western. So an example that they gave is a 35-year-old African American woman who married a 36-year-old African man. I believe he was from Ghana. The husband was conducting his marriage based on his culture. He was very private about his business, his travels. He only associated with people from Ghana. He did not communicate with his wife. This began to bother his wife, who was African American, had been raised here, born here in the United States, and so she felt his behavior was very secretive and exclusive. The wife really pushed for them to go to counseling. When they got to the counselor, the husband was very uncomfortable because the counselor was a white female. So as a part of their treatment plan, they brought in a male African American counselor to serve as a co-therapist, and that was able to help the African man be able to be open to counseling and working on his marriage. The next is the family's level of acculturation. Sometimes the family's level of acculturation does not match that of the client. For example, if you have a first-generation American student who's from a more traditional family, there may be conflict with their views. The example that they gave was of an 18-year-old tradition Indian family. An 18-year-old female from a tradition Indian family, and she came to a counselor wanting to learn more about birth control. Her parents were planning on an arranged marriage, and in these arranged marriages, of course, virginity is expected, and it can be really bad if the future husband or the husband suspects that his wife is not a virgin. She was not opposed to the arranged marriage. However, she was interested in exploring the more Anglo teenager, American, Western teenager kind of lifestyle that she saw that her friends have. So one of the things that the counselor had to do was help her understand that the type of lifestyle that she was interested in exploring may not be good for her if she wants to be a part of a traditional Indian marriage, and that's going to be her chosen path. In some cases, the family's attitude towards acculturation isn't as different as the client's. There may be very little difference, or it may be the same. In traditional Indian, Asian, or Middle Eastern societies, parents may sometimes give their children more freedom to explore American culture. However, they may want their children to retain knowledge in certain aspects of their own heritage. One of the examples that they gave here was about a 22-year-old Italian student. She wanted more autonomy, wanted more independence, and she wanted her family to be a part of this counseling process and wanted to be able to talk to them about her desires and her independence. So they brought in a co-therapist who was fluent in Italian and included her parents in the counseling session, and that was very effective. So it's important that the counselor explores the depth of the family's attitude towards acculturation.
So, to sum up, worldview assessment should be a key aspect of multicultural counseling. Most counselor training programs do operate from Eurocentric bias, so they need to keep that worldview assessment in the back of their minds to better help diverse clients. They also need to take into account differences not only between different cultures, but within cultures. Each case needs to be studied on an individual basis. And in addition to racial, ethnic, and national groupings, there needs to be consideration taken in for differences in gender, gender identity, religious identity, and sexual orientation. So, our discussion questions are the first one: have you ever had a situation with a student where their worldview or their family's acculturation prevented them from getting the proper and necessary counseling services? In what ways can we, as educators, utilize the ideas of worldview and acculturation from a teaching standpoint? And what types of training would you recommend for counselors and teachers based on the 6 themes we discussed?